Back a year ago.
This episode of the Beer Bound Podcast is brought to you by Rolling Hops Beer Tours.
Hey everybody, Garrett here from Rolling Hops, as always joined with my partner,
Andy.
We're here to tell you guys about our virtual craft beer tour offering. With what's going on in the world, unfortunately, we haven't been able to run our historical craft walking beer tour, so we've pivoted to taking the virtual experience of craft beer directly to you guys. Wonderful for team building events, corporate events, even just a night out or in, for that matter, with your friends and family. And we're doing this online.
Have any questions about the beer tours or want us to tailor make an event for you? Just shoot us an email or send us a message on any form of social media. Rolling Hops, you can find us everywhere.
RollingHopsBeerTours.com is where you can get a hold of us, and we'll see you guys soon.
Cheers. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Beer Bound Podcast. We're very excited to be joined by Matt Hamill, professional maltster at Red Shed Malting. One can find Red Shed Malting in Red Deer County, Alberta. This agricultural enterprise was born out of the need for locally sourced, traceable specialty malt, as currently most specialty malts are imported into Canada for the growing beer market. It's fair to say that the typical beer consumer is seeking more complex flavors and a better understanding of what ingredients are used to make their craft beer. Red Shed Malting sees itself as the missing link in the chain between the barley grower and the brewmaster. We've met and spoken with many folks in the craft beer community and are now excited to delve further back in the fabrication process to learn about where and how malt is created, cultivated, and distributed. So let's get into it. Without further ado, we welcome Matt to the Beer Bound Podcast. Hello, Matt.
Hey, thanks for having me, Andy and Garrett. Pleased to be here.
Welcome.
Welcome, Matt. All right, start us off. Matt, who are you? What do you do? Where do you work?
You bet. So Matt Hamill, Red Shed Malting. So Red Shed Malting has been around for 7 or 8 years now. And we take barley from my parents' farm, and barley and wheat, and we process that and turn it into usable ingredients for brewers and distillers. So we have a pretty good presence in the Alberta market. We're working with about half the breweries around, and we've started exporting some stuff into BC, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and a little bit leaking into Ontario there as well.
That's great to hear. All right, well, start us off. Give us the introduction to malt. What is malt? What makes malt different from barley?
Okay, now you got to stop me if I start getting rambly here, because that's happened before. But to try to get it down to a nice short version, the essentials of the malting process are steeping, germination, and kilning. So the steeping process is we're taking some cleaned barley after the farmer's gotten it off the field, and we give that wet cycles and dry cycles. We're trying to increase the moisture of the barley to make it think that it's in the ground, it's been rained on, it's the springtime, it's time to start growing. So the steeping process is about 48 hours. And at the end of the steeping process, you want to have chitted barley. So chitted barley just means that the roots starting to show out of the back of the seed. Once we get it to that point, then we transfer it from our steep tank into our germination kiln boxes. And in the germination phase, there we're just changing, basically the seed wants to turn everything that's inside of it into plant food so that it would eventually grow that barley plant. So what that's doing is it's changing some of the complex carbs into more simple sugars. Those simple sugars are what the brewers and distillers can ferment into alcohol. And the other thing that it's doing is it's changing some of the enzymes inside of it. So reducing beta glucan, increasing alpha amylase, super nerdy stuff, just making it possible for the chemical reactions to happen. So once we got the sugar profile and the enzyme profile the way we want it, then we need to stop that whole process. And we do that by kilning the barley. So kilning, adding hot air from underneath, and that'll dry it down to about 4% moisture where it's shelf stable. And we can ship that around the country.
That's obviously a very crucial part of beer making. So it's nice to get a little background on how that malt is actually made. So I appreciate the process there. When you say nerd out, like nerd out here. We love all the nerdy details. We love that stuff. So go nuts on that.
Okay.
But for the most part, everyone's pretty familiar with at least what goes into beer, and one of those being the malt, and mainly a barley base. But just going through, we're obviously beer nerds, and going through your website as well, we see different types of malt. So for instance, you got like base malt on there, and high dried malts, and specialty roasted malt, and things like that. So I imagine this is where it gets a little more intricate. Maybe you could describe some of those varieties and how they pertain to beer making.
Yeah, so that's a great place to go with this. So one of our main focuses with Red Shed Malting is making some of the specialty malts. So in a typical beer recipe, you might have 80% base malt, 20% specialty malt. The base malt is going to provide those sugars that get fermented into alcohol. The specialty malts are more like a spice. So we're getting some aromas, some colors, and some flavors out of it. Some of the flavors that we can create with the specialty malts are going to be like a home baking. So kind of like biscuits or breakfast cereal. We can get into some caramel flavors, some nuttiness, and some chocolate and coffee stuff when we really start pushing the temperatures. And so yeah, that's really what makes us different is that malt roaster. So our purpose as a company is to make more beer styles possible out of only Canadian ingredients. When we got going on this 7 years ago, we had the first malt roaster in Canada, so that was definitely very, very exciting. And it was a way to do something a little bit different. We're in the heart of the barley growing region of Canada. We got 2 giant maltsters close to us. And so it just lets us interact with more breweries and keep things exciting in the industry.
Cool. Yeah, it's neat stuff. So you're saying with there's a sort of that I guess backbone would be the base malt for the majority of the beer making process, and the specialty ones being that spice. Is there maybe I was just looking on your website, I saw a number of them, like you're saying, with regards to biscuit and chocolate and amber and things of that nature. Is there maybe a preference for some of the breweries that you work with to lean more towards one, or do you just have a set sort of flagship array of them? Maybe you can tell us a bit about some of those trends.
Yeah, so the one that's we're best known for is our biscuit malt. The feedback that we're getting from brewers is they order that for the first time, they open the bag, and that aroma just hits them in the face, and they're super excited about it, and that's memorable, and that's when we got a customer for life. So it's our lightest roasted malt. So really starting to get those intense flavors, but you can still add quite a bit of it into a beer without it being overpowering. So just a neat way to add a little bit more complexities to some of to any beer style, right? So you can have, a lager or a Vienna lager, or getting into the pale ales, IPAs, the stouts, really anything. It's super versatile malt, and just gives nice aroma on there.
Awesome. Yeah, we've Andy and I have been in the breweries when after a brew day, and you could smell all the malt that's been going into the mash tun and whatnot, and it smells wonderful. Although I don't think I've gotten my nose in a freshly opened bag of grain just yet, so I'll have to put that on the list next time we're at a brewery.
Absolutely, it's whether it's consumers or brewers, I'm always encouraging them to get some of the malt in your mouth. Like, it's pretty cool when you can chew on one of the malts and then taste the beer that's made with that malt and start making those associations.
Cool. Yeah, I'll have to give that a shot.
Matt, it's fair to say that your production tailors to craft breweries predominantly. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, we do have some distillery customers that we're super excited about that are making some really good products, and some of them are on the market. But as far as the distilleries, there's a lot of stuff aging in barrels that you'll start seeing more and more of in the future here.
Right. But for like so say for the massive macro breweries in Canada and say the United States, like where do they get their massive supply of malt? Where does that come from? Like geographically in the world, where are the mass producers?
So it's still coming from Alberta, but it's coming from a couple of the big malt plants that are in our vicinity. So to give an example, Canada Malting has a plant in Calgary and RAR has a plant in Alex. And each of those plants, well, we produce 1/4 of 1% of those plants.
Wow,
then
1/4 of 1%. Holy.
Yeah. And then Canada Malt, they'll have another plant in Quebec, another one in Ontario, one in the States there. So there's a lot of malt being made in Canada. But now just to kind of put it on a world perspective there too, North America has about 15 million tons of malt or of barley. 10 million of that's grown in Canada, 5 million of that's grown in Alberta. So Alberta's 1/3 of North America's barley, so it's definitely the hot spot. We got a barley breeding program that's just up the road from us. We got an ag school that's training some of the brewmasters and some of the other industry people. So Alberta's barley country, and so it's a great place to have a small malt house.
Yeah, it's the bread basket, as it were. That's fantastic. Is it your preference to stay sort of a specialty enterprise, or would it even make sense just going with the numbers that you divulged to look to become a bigger player across the country, or like Canada Malting, like these massive companies, are they really unstoppable in terms of the quantity of production they have going?
Well, the goal isn't to get up to like 140,000 tons per plant like they are. But there's still definitely ways that we can keep growing. So we're excited at finding opportunities to get malt across the country. And then just by our nature with dealing with all the specialty malts, it allows us to have a large number of customers, even if we're just giving a little bit of product to each of them. So we got our foot in the door so that when we do have some base malts and some of the high kiln malts that are using larger percentages, we can start moving more of those pretty quick as well. And so we're trying to find ways to be pretty exciting on that base malt side as well. So we have the barley breeding program in Alberta, so we're playing around with the newest varieties that are coming out. And some of the new varieties are a lot more dialed in for making all grain beer, so for making craft beer. Because in the past, lots of the barley varieties, they were kind of being bred to make adjuncts or to make macro lagers, right? So they had to be super high enzyme so that they had everything that was needed to add a bunch of raw corn or rice to the recipe as well.
You've been a Maltster for 7 years, is that right? Is that?
It's close to it. I mean, if it's not right, it's close. I'm horrible at dates.
Yeah. So Red Shed's about 7 years old, something like that. What Matt, what were you doing prior to that? I think that was not your first efforts in the agricultural world. Can you tell us what your experience is before entering the malt industry?
Okay, well, my background couldn't be more boring. So before malting, I was a banker. I was in the agriculture space, so I was dealing with lots of farmers, and that was interesting. And that, but the other family members have a more interesting background. So Dad's got the family farm, 4th generation grain farm. Great grandpa moved over in 1929. My brother, he helps out lots on the farm, and he's the full-time maltster. And we got into the industry because Joe started doing some home brewing, and eventually we just got really excited about getting Joe's dad's barley into Joe's beer. And so that's where we started looking at malting and started looking at who was doing it, and realized there was a bit of an opportunity in the industry. And It was just a natural extension of the farm in an industry that we were excited to be in.
What was the basis of the original farm?
So the farm, it's a mixed grain farm. So we've always had barley and malt barley on there, but we're also growing wheat, canola, oats, and peas. And so we want to keep different crops going on to different quarters all the time. By rotating those crops, you're reducing disease pressure, and you're being more efficient with some of your inputs. So it's just a more sustainable way of farming. On the farm side, we kind of look at the soil organic matter as the scorecard for our sustainability. So if you're building soil organic matter, you're leaving the soil in better condition than you found it. And we're happy to say that we got really good soil organic matter.
Can you take us back a little bit? I mean, I think maybe folks aren't too aware, they probably should be, that Saskatchewan, Alberta, like the grain industry, the wheat, the barley is traditionally a massive part of the economic engine of these provinces. Do you know why that is? Why did these locations actually become so synonymous with this particular style of farming?
For lots of the grain farms, and for barley especially, there's a couple things in the climate that are working in our favor. So we are far enough north that we're getting some nice long days, and for barley, having the cool nights is actually pretty important too for kind of hitting those malt specs. But then we're far enough south that we have enough frost-free days in the season so that we can grow these crops and not get frosted out at the end of the season. And then east-west wise, we got this nice narrow strip of high quality black soil. And so that's where our farm's located. And then as you kind of move away from that, the soil is maybe, well, if you move to the west, you're going to end up in mountains, and mountains aren't good for growing grain crops. And then if you move real far east, then you're starting to get more into corn and soybean country. And so those are crops that are going to compete with some of the small grains that we have here. And it's also going to bring a little bit of disease pressure, especially for the wheat, canola, barley crops. And so that's kind of why lots of these small grains have really centered in the prairie provinces, and then just the states that are right below us as well.
Do you see Red Shed do you see this as a continuing phenomenon? Do you see other smaller maltsters popping up more and more? Was that sort of something that you guys originated? Has there been a following in terms of that? Like, I guess what I'm seeing is like craft breweries even 10 years ago, there just weren't even, there wasn't even half of how many there are now. Is that, do you see you've sort of latched onto this trend a little bit, and now the craft maltsters, the craft hop farmers, like kind of following suit, or maybe not so much?
Yeah, so I think it's like the craft breweries are going to be a leading indicator. So as you start getting more and more craft breweries, and you start getting more and more all grain beers being brewed, so even when the macro brewers start copying and start making the all grain brews, or even when they're buying up, like who was the last one to get bought out? New Belgium, or Lagunitas, and that. They're still making all grain beers, and so it just increases the demand for malting. The big maltsters, they're expanding their plants as well, but there's room for us small maltsters as well. And I've been seeing lots of small maltsters pop up in areas where barley hasn't been grown in the last few decades. They're starting to come out with some varieties of barley that are more resistant to some of those diseases that follow corn and soybeans, like I mentioned, and some that just work better in some of the soil types that are further out east. So anywhere that you got people that are brewing beer, and I think anywhere that has people that are using malt and spirits, there's going to be an interest. Lots of these breweries are popping up and saying, you know, local's best, and I totally agree with that. Local is best. So having a local barley supplier and local barley farms in that area, that's something that we'll see more and more of for sure. You guys got some great ones in Ontario.
Yeah, we need to.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Garrett might be more knowledgeable.
That's kind of our first foray into, like, because we, you know, like Andy was saying, we typically talk to a lot of brewers. It's our, you know, our first point of contact as a craft brewery tour company. But yeah, we've been looking to expand that a little bit, right? And, you know, I just did to be honest, like a big Google search and looked at a number of different players in Canada. And well, you guys came up as one, which is why I reached out to you in the first place. But yeah, we're looking to learn a little bit more, and you know, by doing these podcasts is actually probably our best way of learning all about, you know, whether it be a brewer or whether it be a, you know, a beer journalist or writer or maltster. And this is where we're trying to get a good portion of our education from. So we appreciate all your insights. And yeah, we're definitely going to look into a lot more locally for sure. I like what you said, though.
We definitely end up involved. We definitely end up involved in some tours where people are just kind of touring the whole barley value chain. So they'll go to a barley farm, they'll go to a small maltster, then they'll go to a brewer and a distiller that are using some of those grains. And so just to see the whole flow of the barley from grain to glasses, that's pretty exciting for some consumers and stuff. So you guys got Barn Owl Malted out in your area. They're doing some phenomenal things. You guys got some small hop farmers. I saw on or listened to the podcast earlier. You guys had farm brewery with they grew their own hops as well too, right?
Good Lot Farmstead.
Yeah, Farmstead. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, absolutely. So some cool things are being done, and yeah, consumers like it.
Yeah, Matt, this is a very novice question, but the malting process, it is just generally, obviously, there's many ways different specialty malt, different styles of malting can occur. Is it very different, like in terms of malting for beer as opposed to different spirits? Is that entirely different? Can it be the same? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It's largely the same. So there's going to be some nuanced changes in the processing. You might choose a little bit of different barley going into the process if you know it's going to be for a distiller. There's some attributes you're going to be looking for there. You might give it a little bit lighter of a kiln profile on there to keep color nice and light on it. Yeah, choosing the varieties and stuff. But for a large part, like you could take brewer's malt and you could go make a spirit with it, and you could take a distiller's malt and you can make a beer out of it. Yeah, and then processing wise, I didn't mention this when we were talking about process, but the malting process is basically a 7-day process, and that's going to be the same whether you're making brewer's malt or distiller's malt.
Right. And going through like the yearly calendar, for those who don't know, gets pretty cold in Alberta in the wintertime. Can you kind of break down how a cyclical year works in terms of cultivating the barley and just the whole process? Can you kind of give us a scope of what happens when during each season of the year?
Yeah, so in the malt house, it actually stays fairly consistent. Like we'll get the farms to get us a year supply of barley, or because we're directly attached to the farm, we hold back like 3 or 4 years a supply of barley for our operation. And so we're able to get new batches in every week. And so the week to week is usually fairly consistent. There's going to be some changes, especially with the roaster. Some of the roast times are going to change a little bit when the ambient temperature in the malt house and outside is a lot colder, or there's a lot less humidity in the air, like there is right now. It's on the farm side, obviously, that's where you're going to have massive amounts of seasonality. So growing season, then we get into harvest. After harvest, we need to test that barley. Some of the barleys will go dormant right after the harvest season, which is almost like a self-protection mechanism that they have built in. And it's more common in some of the European varieties and some of the ones that will will be grown kind of in Eastern Canada there, because if it's rainy during the harvest season, they don't want it to sprout in field. that's real bad because barley only wants to grow once. So by having something that goes dormant for a little bit, then it gives you the opportunity to harvest it, get it in the bin, get it to the maltster. We wait for it to break dormancy, and then we can malt it. Yeah, so there's a little bit of a waiting period there. But then, then we're into malting and we're going hard. So we can have, we'll have the 2022 crop of barley, and we'll start malting that in December, January.
Cool. And that dormant phase, like, is that just, you just need to warm it up a little bit because it's cold, or is there something you need to do to trigger that, or is it just sort of a, waiting game?
Just wait. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, just wait longer.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Whenever the barley's ready to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the sleeping time. You mentioned, Matt, the different varieties of barley. You mentioned some varieties that are only accessible in Europe. Can you tell us what the main, types, strains of barley that are synonymous to Western Canada?
Yeah, so usually when we're talking like Europe versus some of the Canadian and North American varieties, lots of the European varieties are a winter barley, so they'll plant those in the fall, whereas ours are all spring varieties. And so it's just a completely different growth cycle, and it doesn't translate well trying to bring one over to the other. Just our winters are too harsh. So that's going to be the biggest difference there. The most well-known European variety is Maris Otter, and it's a winter variety. And so the barley breeding programs have been working hard to try to cross that with the spring variety to keep some of the flavor attributes of Maris Otter, but get it into something that grows in North America. So the Lacombe breeding program, they got some good stuff going on, trying to make some strides there. I know Oregon State, their university has a barley breeding program that's also working hard on coming up with one. But yeah, so that winter spring is going to be the biggest difference between the European and the North American varieties.
That's interesting. So there's no way a winter variety could sustain itself with the cold weather in the wintertime here. Like it just wouldn't last at all.
Not economically. Like maybe you'd have some growth, but there'd be some winter kill, and it's just that would be an absolute uphill battle.
Where are the main locations in Europe for barley?
That's a good one. So it's people that are really interested in that one are going to want to fact check this answer. But the UK comes up with quite a bit, and I think there's quite a bit of barley grown in Russia, Ukraine, kind of the Fertile Crescent area there.
Right. And in the US, you mentioned just south of you. So that would be like the Dakotas, Montana, Idaho.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So Miller Coors, so like the Coors Original, they contract with some farmers there. They have their own specific varieties of barley from their own breeding program. And yeah, the Coors plant in Golden is actually a pretty interesting kind of little case study, because they got their barley program. They're coming up with their own varieties. They contract that with farmers directly. They buy all the barley that's grown. They have their own malt facility, so it's not common anymore that you see breweries that have their own malting facility. Wow. They're also doing all the water treatment for the town of Golden. They also produce all their cans. So it's, a lot of people like to hate on the big guys. And I guess that is a case of the big guys doing big guy things. But to go down there and tour, it's pretty neat. And the people that I've met there are pretty fantastic. But yeah.
Sounds like they're taking care of the town, though. That's
yeah, it's
pretty
neat.
good.
Like, yeah, it's beer does good things,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
people that drink good beer like to do good things usually.
Yeah. I've read that too. Yeah, I've read that too about, like, I think Heineken has their own patented patented variety of malt. Like that
Yeah.
seems so almost like science fiction to me, that you can produce your own malt that's so, or your own barley and malted in such a way that's proprietary. That seems odd.
It is odd. And so barley, like when you compare barley to wheat or corn or soybeans, there's just so few acres comparatively, that lots of the big seed and ag companies, they aren't willing to invest the research dollars to come out with better varieties. And so that's why some of that breeding and research has been taken on by industry, just because they have a vested interest in it and no one else is going to do it for them. So barley's pretty unique that way.
That's interesting. You said there, if I recall, there's a breeding program that was near you guys, right?
Yeah. So the Lacombe Field Crop Development Center, some great breeders there, Flavio and Dr. Pat. And it's super neat to, like, we're absolutely spoiled that we have these guys in our backyard. So they're developing these new varieties. Before small maltsters came along, they used to have to come up with like a whole bunch of seed and then a whole bunch of crop so that they could get like a commercial batch of barley malted and then get that to a brewer for testing and then get feedback. We're able to kind of squeeze in to that whole process a little bit earlier. If we can get 1.5 tons of barley from them, then we can turn that into a batch and get that in the hands of 5 or 10 brewers and get feedback on the flavor attributes and the brewing performance right away for them. So they like that so that they can stop investing dollars if it's not going to make good beer in the end. And our customers like that too, because we went to Red Heart a couple of years ago and said, hey, you're the first commercial brewery in the world to get to use low barley. And they thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah, it's cool. I guess another story of beer people helping beer people in a sense, which is really cool. Is there something with, I don't know, it sounds like you're pretty close with the fellows near you doing the breeding program. Like, is there something they're always trying to attain, or is it just trying to get efficiency? Like what's maybe one of the goals of what they're trying to do? So
when you say efficiency, what that usually means, what that looks like in a barley breeding program or a crop breeding program, is agronomics. So higher yield, or more disease protection. And what we're kind of doing as the small guys and as what the craft beer industry is doing, is we're pushing these barley breeding programs to focus on some different attributes. So we can, if we don't have to go for high enzyme, then we can focus on some other things like they're really nerd out, like lower FAN, lower DP, lower protein, lower beta glucan, all things that kind of help with the all grain brewing. One that's a lot less nerdy is just more interesting flavors. So if we can get more interesting flavor from a barley, that's a win. And we don't need to be able to sell 140,000 tons of it. If we have some customers who are interested in brewing beers with that and willing to pay a little bit of a premium, then we can rock that out. And the barley breeding programs have been quite receptive to it. Like they're humans. We get to talk to them, and they're out in the field and they're selecting crops and they're looking for attributes. And if we tell them to look for an attribute, they're looking for it. So it's pretty neat to kind of have that influence. Yeah, and in turn, like the Lacombe Field Crop Development Center, they do a field day where they're showing some of these new varieties to the industry and to the public. And we're happy to go out there, and we'll usually go out with a brewery, and it's, if we can hand people cans of beer, then they'll stick around a little bit longer and learn a little bit more.
Shocking. Give someone beer and they'll hang around and listen to you?
Yeah.
Flawless plan. Okay, that's pretty cool.
Matt, in terms of brewing yourself, you said, I believe your brother or your father did some brewing. Is that right?
Yeah, my brother Joe did some brewing. Yeah.
Your brother Joe, does he still maintain some brewing? Is that is that still just sort of a hobby, or do you do any professional production whatsoever?
The malt company has taken over our life a little bit and eaten into free time quite a bit. So Joe has not been able to do as much home brewing as he would like. He actually did end up selling his home brewing equipment. But we get like one of the best parts of our job is collab brews. Have you guys been invited to a collab brew?
It's on our to hopefully get list.
You need to weasel your way into some
Yeah.
brews, because it's Joe gets to scratch the itch of like staying with the brewing process and learning and experimenting. And I get to scratch the itch of going and hanging out in a brewery and having a beer. So there's a lot of benefits to getting involved in a collaboration brew.
Absolutely. It sounds like a win-win-win. Yeah, we would love to do that. And I think we've always talked about maybe just tagging along with, one of the brewery partners that we work with in and around the city, just to see the brewing process in itself. We learn about it. We know the theory, we understand the ingredients and the process and things like that. But just to sort of put the boots on and get our hands dirty a little bit, I think would be great. And we're trying to shoot to get that done at some point. I think it'd be a wonderful experience and obviously bring us a little closer to some of our partners. But yeah, hey, if we can collab and get maybe our names on that can too, hey, nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah, well, because Garrett and I, we do know some hop farm / brewery. So I don't think we've heard of a Maltster / brewery. So like, I guess I'm hinting at like attaching maybe a brewery to your enterprise, maybe a little bit of maybe an enormous undertaking, but maybe in the future, potentially.
Yeah, we need less jobs, not more jobs. Yeah,
All right.
And it's like our customers are so amazing and stuff, and there is not a gap that we would be able to fill in like the amazing beer that's being produced out there. So we'll stick to the malting. We'll keep making more beer styles possible out of Canadian ingredients, and let these brewers keep blowing us away with amazing products.
Right, that's fair.
Do you hold up your end of the bargain?
Yeah, exactly. Do you have, Matt? Do you have some room to grow even with your distribution to more breweries, or are you sort of maxed out where you are in terms of your capacity as well as the limit? Have you reached the limit of your production, I guess?
Yeah, we're approaching the limit, but we are definitely interested in expanding. The challenge is expanding as a maltster is quite capital intensive. We're very, very jealous of the breweries who kind of, if they can come up with the initial investment to start that brewery, they might be able to double production by buying a few more fermenters for 50 grand. Whereas we're probably looking at new buildings, new equipment, new everything, and it's just really chunky. So it's doubling production or tripling production and stuff. So it's in the future, but it's daunting.
A larger marginal step, I guess, than it's not a little later on in the, I guess, later portions of production.
Matt, how difficult is it for you to sell your product internationally?
Internationally, we haven't looked into it too much. Like, it's pushing it just over the US border. Seems like it would make sense. Obviously, there's a ton of breweries in Portland and Washington, Montana. But we're really just looking to stick with the Canadian brewing industry and distilling industry now. There's a lot of room for us to grow without having to jump over the border.
Fair enough. Keep it local. Actually, maybe to that point, I was perusing your website and saw that, it's like, where could we find your malt? And there's a whole number of breweries on there, which is great. Seems like you have a very wide reach, which is fantastic. How did that initially look? I know you guys, you said you're about 7 to 8 years old roughly, and then starting out and getting your foot in the industry with brewers or it seems like home brew shops and things like that. How did you first approach that with, let's say your sales tactics to get, Red Shed Malt into the hands of these breweries?
So the numbers have changed quite a bit, but the ratio has actually stayed fairly constant. So by the end of our first year of business, we were dealing with about half the breweries in the province. At that time, that half the breweries was 10. Now 7 years later, we're still dealing with about half the breweries in the province, and we're up to like 75. Plus we got some in BC, across the prairies here, and up in Yukon and stuff. So that's been exciting. We're just growing with the industry, and we'll see customers, and we get to watch them grow too, because of the order size grows and grows and grows. But like looking back on some of those early days, our very first customer was Alley Cat Brewing. So craft brewery in Edmonton that's been around since 1984, I believe. So one of the pioneers, got some Canadian Brewing Awards under their belt, experienced brew team, great ownership team. And my brother and I, nervous as all heck, went up there with our bag of malts and had a meeting with the owner and the head brewer, and they opened up the bags and sniffed them, and then you could just see the wheels turning. They're like, ooh, I like the roastiness on this one. And so they decided that a Scotch ale was going to be the way to incorporate as many of them as possible and showcase them, and that went well. And then that turned into them doing a seasonal release using all Red Shed malts. And eventually that turned into them using some of our malt in some of the core beers. And that's a progression that we've seen and that we like to see with our customers too. It's, they'll dip their toes in the water, but as long as we can get that first bag of malt in the door and they have a good experience opening a fresh bag of roasted malt, it's just so different than malt that's been imported from overseas and has been sitting in a warehouse for a while. That first bag just makes a world of a difference, and it grows quickly from there.
Make a bang on first impression, and then the rest is history, I guess, right?
Yep.
That's cool.
Matt, how does one get to know your trade or your craft? How would one? It just seems like being a maltster almost seems like a profession from the 1700s. Like, how would one go about in the best way, just learning the ins and outs? Obviously, you have a bit of an advantage having your family institution being connected to the craft, but how would one go about even starting such an enterprise such as what you've done, or even looking into potentially what you do as a profession?
So the world of malt, unbeknownst to me when we started this whole thing, keeps pulling me back to Winnipeg. So Winnipeg is home of the Canadian Malt Barley Technical Center. And that is an organization that tests lots of the Canadian barley crop so that they can give information to some of our export customers. But they're also run a training program that they lovingly call the Malt Academy. And so my brother and I took the Malt Academy course, and that was where it all started. So we learned about the process, we learned a little bit about the industry, learned about some of the equipment required to do the malting, and that was just that was the most important bit of training that we did. Other than that, we're involved in some industry groups. So we're involved with the Craft Maltsters Guild, which is mostly North American small scale malt houses, just kind of talking together. They're in the midst of their conference right now. So learning about some of the things that are changing in the industry, talking about what's going well, what needs to do better, what sort of things we can ask the government to help out with. We work closely with the Grain Commission. So Alberta Barley has been just a fantastic partner. They're excited to see the growth of all grain brewing. Craft beer uses 3 to 7 times the amount of barley as these macro lagers, because the macro lagers are adding the corn and the rice. So it's they're fans of us and we're fans of them, of Alberta Barley. Yeah, so those are the kind of the people that we look to for advice and insight and mentorship. And yeah, so it's pack your bags, go to Winnipeg, and start learning about malting if that's the life goal.
Right. So there is an educational institution in Winnipeg. So that's good to know, just in case anyone listening is interested. What can you say the location again? What is that called in Winnipeg?
Yeah. You want to hear me say Malt Academy again because it sounds so nerdy? Or
Yeah,
the Canadian Malt Barley Technical Center.
Say it again. Yeah. All right, cool. And is that's like the principal location? I suspect there's no other locations. Winnipeg is the Mecca.
One, the only. Yep.
Okay.
I've been petitioning them to open a second shop in Hawaii, but I guess uphill pitch.
A little far from the fields of barley, I suppose.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Do you? I don't know if we've touched on this. Does the malting process for Red Shed? Do you go above and beyond barley? Have we touched on that? Like, or is barley it for you guys?
We haven't touched on that, and I'm notoriously bad for not bringing that up. But yeah, we absolutely we malt wheat as well. We have a roasted malted wheat, which is a really cool product for like adding lots of color to a beer without lots of bitterness. So lots of the red ales that are like really red, that's coming from a roasted barley product. We've done some malting of oats. You guys may have noticed that hazy beers seem to be popular. So yeah, dropping in some oats and some wheat in there is a quick way to haze. And then, the future, hopefully that holds some rye for us. And we're always looking at other grains to play around with, but it's always a trade-off of, do you have the time to dabble with other grains in the system too?
Yeah, Garrett and we've heard of, you can malt a lot of things. Like you mentioned, not only just your typical grains, but obviously gluten-free beers are becoming
sorghum and millet, and
that's right. Yeah, is that maybe in the future for you guys potentially?
Yeah, about the enthusiasm that you put into that is about the enthusiasm I would say.
So probably not.
There's a place in Colorado, Grouse Malting, and they actually deal, I think, exclusively in gluten-free grains for brewing. And they got a malt roaster. So that's kind of like a one-stop shop for everything that you would need to do gluten-free brewing. So if there wasn't someone doing it, we would probably take a longer, harder look at it. But they're doing it, and they're doing it well. And I'm a gluten fiend. Like, it's get that bread.
I think I would agree. Like, give it the carbs. I'll take every single bit of it, and if it comes in bread form, even better. Yeah, it's funny. Like we do our events, and some of them are, well, most of them are our walking tours, but we also have virtual events, and there are some guests that are gluten free, and we'd like to try and appeal to those customers, of course. And finding a gluten-free beer, in Southern Ontario is a task. It's tough, right? It's not there. And from our research and our experiences talking to a number of different breweries in Southern Ontario, at least anyways, it was a fad almost like a few years ago. It's like everyone wanted a gluten-free beer, try this gluten-free beer. And now it's hard to find one. I think there's just maybe one that's kind of our go-to, and I think it's the Exchange Brewery in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and they do one consistently. It's a gluten-free saison, which is really good, and we'd like to showcase that. And there are a couple others around, Glutenberg for one. But yeah, exactly. But yeah, you just don't see it as much anymore.
Yeah, we have an Alberta brewery that's gone after the gluten-free market, Heathens Brewing, and they're doing it, and they're not half-assing it. So you can get like a hazy tropical pale ale, you can get a nice roasty stout. So I'm excited that they're doing that. I think as Canadians, we're lucky to have Glutenberg. I think the Glutenberg Red won Beer of the Year regardless of category last year or the year before. So Great beer can be made without barley, but that's not the dance that I'm dancing.
Obviously, we're all aware that the craft beer scene, it does follow trends, and it can often become a bit of a roller coaster or a kind of a side to side dance of what things become popular, and that can often become different quite quickly. Is that something you guys at Red Shed you try to stay on top of? Obviously, you probably need to know that in terms of what is the hot beer of the day and how that relates to the particular variety of malt that will be more popular for brewers to purchase.
Yeah, it all plays into our, making more beer styles possible out of Canadian ingredients. So it's, if there's a hot trendy beer that's coming up and we can facilitate that being made out of Canadian ingredients, we're interested in it for sure. And we want to help the industry, and that's just going to be good for everyone. So definitely something that we're trying to do, and it's a enjoyable activity to try to stay current on trends in the beer industry for me. So it's I'll keep going to the tap rooms and checking what's on the menu board and talking to the brewers and seeing what they got in the pipe, and even staying in touch and in the loop on some of the homebrew competitions. There's a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of even going back and checking out the historical styles. And the homebrewers are just doing great. So they are absolutely a source of information for where we're going and what's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Market research is key. Even if that means going to have 7, 8 to 9 to 12 pints somewhere, you just do it for the business. That's what you got to do.
Yeah, it's a tough life.
It's hard.
Someone's got to do it. Matt, we're coming up on our hour mark, but I want to throw out two questions in conjunction with one another, and they're very simplistic. But if you had to describe kind of briefly or at a little bit of length, what is the best part of your job and what's the worst part of your job?
Okay, well, the first part's easier. The best part of my job has always been putting a can of beer in Dad's hand and saying, "Your barley's in this," and he just gets so excited about it, and he'll change flags pretty quick, and that'll become his favorite beer in the world. But I forgive him for that. It's just to see the enthusiasm. It's pretty exciting, and we've been able to help other farmers realize that too by doing some custom malting, where the farmer and the brewer come to us with some cool projects. Even though we're a small scale, we've been able to do some act like bigger players, doing some firsts. So we were the first guys in North America to come out with a beer where they traced the barley using blockchain technology throughout the whole process. Like I mentioned, we're able to work with the seed companies and the breeding programs to get feedback on some of these new varieties early. That's something that's really neat. But as far as what's the worst part about, it's I guess waiting. So it's, malting's a 7-day process, and you gotta wait for the next step, and you gotta pull out barley kernels and count how many of them are chitted, and then once they've all been chitted, then you got to start counting them for how far the acrospire is. So you're always waiting and always counting, and then you grow into your facility and you need to expand again, and so you got to wait for that. And so it's I like to go, and you can't always do that in the industry. Sometimes you got to wait.
No patience.
Are you hear about these amazing beers that are going into barrels, or you're dealing with distilleries that have just absolutely incredible products that are going to be coming out, and you're like, well, I guess they'll get to try that in 7 years.
That's true, I guess, with the distillers, right? Whiskey is minimum 3 years, right? For any whiskey,
yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, just to wait that long just to taste and sample your product. It's very different. All right, well, I guess that is our hour. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. Matt Hamill from Red Shed Malting in Red Deer County, Alberta. Matt, I think Garrett and I learned a ton today, so we really appreciate you taking the time. We look forward to chatting with you again, hopefully soon.
Awesome. I had a blast. Thanks again for having me. I appreciate it, guys, and good luck with everything.
Thanks so
Cheers,
much.
thanks,
I'm
Matt.
looking forward to everyone going and doing more beer tours in person soon.
So are we. So
Yes.
are we.
If we ever make it to Alberta, we'll definitely stop by and say hello.
Yeah,
I'll
for
show
sure.
you around.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Matt. Talk soon.
Cheers. Take
Yeah.
care.
Bye.
Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all our interviews and beer-related content. Remember, craft beer is here.